I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and today I'm speaking with Natalie Kingston, the cinematographer for the Apple TV Plus series Blackbird, as part of our TV cinematographers panel for Meet the Experts. First question I wanted to ask you is, what were some of the important factors that contributed to establishing the look of the series?
Dennis Lehane, our showrunner, wanted to really, the idea was to explore the depths of toxic masculinity, and basically through character studies and through this intimate, really creepy, awkward, tense relationship between these two prisoners, one being a serial killer. And he wanted to create this uncomfortably tense atmosphere. So I sort of just took that and ran with it, really. And sort of the crux for my visual inspiration was from the photographer Gordon Parks in this 1957 the photo essay that he did called The Atmosphere of Crime. And that, when upon my research and visual research for the show, I'd come across that book. And actually, I'd actually come across it like maybe a year or so before the show, prepping for the show. And I recalled it during the research and looked at that essay again and that series of photos. And that, that was just a huge inspiration and the visual thesis, if you will, for the cinematography.
That was actually another question I was going to ask you about was, what were some of the inspirations you drew from in the visuals that you presented? And I was wondering if you could go more into that initial essay and photo spread that you referenced earlier.
Yeah, that, and that photos, it was, documentary series. It wasn't, editorial at all, so these were real prisoners in real prisons. And, what I took, it was just so powerfully striking. They, were very visceral, obviously, all natural light, but something very moody and cinematic about these photos, for lack of a better word, cinematic. But and that really spoke to me. There is just you could just feel the texture almost in these photos, and there was this pastel color palette that I really responded to, that I thought could be an interesting visual juxtaposition for the tone and the themes that we were exploring in Blackbird. The palette in this photo series was like pastel pinks and seafoam greens and light blues. And we did a similar thing with in our production design in our hero prison, which we spend a lot of time in the series in. And that comes back from years ago. I think it maybe started in the 90s or maybe sooner than that. Wardens believed that if they were to paint prisons, all male prisons, in pastel colors, it would have a calming effect on the prisoners. So I just thought that was just such an unexpected, interesting palette to run with. And so that really informed my choice to shoot on the Panavision H series lenses, which I feel already has this sort of pastel-y, muted, but still really rich palette to them. So it really enhanced that quality. And because, it was really, I was just trying to find that perfect balance between like subdued and moody and muted, but also still maintaining a richness to the image, like those photographs from Gordon Parks, where it just wasn't so washed out. And, it still felt, the black still felt velvety and lush.
How were you able to use the camera to communicate the confinement and the anxiety of that Jimmy feels while he's in prison?
We wanted to create a feeling of claustrophobia, because he is stuck in this cell and in this prison for so long, and also kind of stuck in this weird, awkward relationship with Larry Hall, a serial killer. And he has to just force himself and sort of fake his way into this, on the surface, sincere relationship with this guy to try to get this confession out of him. And so I wanted to create this feeling with the visual language and through lensing and through our format of not being able to escape and immersing the audience into Jimmy King's perspective and trying to just show them how it would feel to just be in this situation. And then also just to really just like plant the audience inside of those conversations whether they're in the cell blocks or in the cells themselves or in the wood shop. We were always everything was just so confined. So I chose to shoot on the mini LF and large format specifically just to embrace that wider field of view, because it can really help us in those small spaces, but also to be able to sort of create a landscape, if you will, with these characters' faces, so you really feel like you're front and center with these characters. So it felt large format felt like the right thing to do just intuitively. And then also keeping camera movement very subtle and very nuanced. I never wanted to distract with over the top camera movement. It was always needed to be motivated by the emotion of a scene or our perspective of a certain character or an objective perspective. So the goal was when we did move the camera, it was to feel rather subconscious, if you will, and kind of unnoticed. And then when we did something, that was maybe a little more over the top, it was really, really motivated. And it was all very strategic when we decided to move the camera. But there is also a lot of static frames as well, where we're just sitting sort of uncomfortably on the edge of our seat with these very creepy, dark, uncomfortable conversations.
I was curious. Did you where did you shoot the prison scenes?
We shot, so there are 3 prisons total in the series, one being our main prison, which was supposed to be Springfield prison. And that was an actual prison in New Orleans. We shot the series in New Orleans. It hasn't been operational since Hurricane Katrina. So we had the run of the place, but, still a real prison. So all the restraints that come with that. The first sort of like holding jail that you see Jimmy Keenan as the series opens was Orleans Parish Prison in New Orleans. So that was also not operational. It was next door to our hero prison. And then when he gets out of there and goes to the next jail, that was actually an old school that wasn't operational that we transformed to a prison. We didn't have to shoot. There weren't many scenes that took place in there other than his cell, which was like an old classroom that we converted into his cell. Our department brought in a wall and we made a window. And then we utilized the existing hallways that were in there already.
So what were, you alluded to this earlier, but what were some of the confinement and constraints that you experienced trying to shoot, specifically the Springfield prison, trying to shoot in that environment?
Yeah, just things like, accessibility to like the lighting, the fluorescent lighting fixtures in there. Every single fixture is bolted shut because it's a prison. So all the bulbs were changed out before we started shooting, so they were all consistent, but I didn't have individual control over them. So we made workarounds, like the grips, like cut out different materials, whether it was black or diffusion or ND gels, and we stuck them on each individual unit with a magnet, stuff like that. And then just shooting like in a real cell. It's small, and getting the camera in there. Our department did cut us out a camera portal think it would, I mean, it's still relatively small, maybe like 4x6, just to be able to utilize another angle. But that was still, it still took a lot of time, it wasn't a quick thing. So we really had to plan around the time it took to open up the portal, get the camera in, which we did with a small, like a GF8 small gym arm, and then put it back so we wouldn't see it on the other shots. So it's not like it would just pop in and out, and let's see what else. And then, just, I think not having control of those, like easily control, like as it would have been on a stage, just to have everything just individually controllable, and then, each cell did have a real window, but the window was like, maybe like, a few inches wide by 3 or 4 feet long. And we were also on the second story of the prison. So we had to get a techno crane up there, and I think the elevator wasn't really operational. So that was tricky. Yeah. And then spending that much time in a real prison kind of gets to you after a while.
Well, Natalie, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to you joining our panel in just a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and I am speaking with Arnau Valls Colomer, the cinematographer for the upcoming Amazon Prime show, The English, as part of our TV cinematographers panel for Meet the Experts. First thing I want to ask is, you get to, shoot in these incredible scenic landscapes of, that are to be the American West. And what was the most exciting thing about getting to shoot a Western with these incredible scenic features?
Well, first when I read the script, I was like, where are we shooting that? And then they told me, well, we're shooting that in Spain, where you live. And I was like, whoa, how are we going to do that? Because I live in Spain and this doesn't look any like it's described on the script. And the director was, no, I've been there and I've seen like some locations and we'll make it work. And I was really skeptical. I mean, I've seen like all the classic Westerns shot in Spain, but the most famous ones were like shot down south in Almeria and like the spaghetti Westerns. But this was like more of like a lot of green and a lot of mountains and a lot of like a different, like more of a, Midwest landscape, not only desert landscape. And they took me to parts of Spain that I didn't know that they existed, basically, and all those like all this Castillas and Castilla-La Mancha and Castilla-León, and we basically did this travel that goes from Louisiana to Nebraska in the story, between South Madrid to North Madrid, and going from the south yellowish flat part of La Mancha to the most like mountain rocky green parts of Avila and make that work. And basically then was like finding the frames and finding the light and raising some wind trills in the background, and that's it. It worked much better, the landscape, than I thought it would be initially, honestly. If I was like, and I lived in the States, so I knew like how the real Midwest is, and I was like, really, are we doing this in Spain? I was like, I don't know. But I think it ended up working.
Well, I mean, that actually brings up an interesting question. I mean, what was it like to discover this whole other part of your home country that you had never seen this type of environment before in your home country? What was that like?
It's like always, like when you frame something in the, like, I never thought of like that part of the country, frame it for a Midwest Western. So I never thought of it. And when you actually do it, and then you realize that it's actually with the areas that we're like shooting, we're not the first ones, and there were actually shot a lot of Westerns there. Like a lot of like this kind of B Westerns were shot there, and it works. And it's just about like, I guess it's about framing it and bringing the scale with the lenses and the scope and the cinemascope and the Technicolor style, and bringing the scale of it to a place, and the composition, and finding the right compositions it was a very surprising and interesting thing to discover.
So, when you have a scene that takes place in the vastness of the West, or what's supposed to be the West, what did you do to better capture intimate moments between characters, specifically the ones with Emily and Chasky?
I mean, the basic rules of like the Western or we just were like following the rules of the cinematic Western, like looking backlight, finding the sunrise and the sunset at the end or the beginning of the scenes, and then working out during the day the intimacy shot and the close-ups and all this. And during the day the director was like was a very visual director, so he was always like where we should look in the morning, where we should look in the evening, position myself what's best for the wide shots, and then let's do what we need to do for the close-ups. And then in the Westerns, there's the hat wall that at the beginning looks like a problem, but ends up like being the big solution for lighting, because you are in the middle of the day and you are the face is covered by a strong shadow, that then you can work the light inside the shadow depending on how you want and how you want to light it. So it was like doing wide shots at the beginning and at the end of the day, and doing close-ups in the middle of it.
So did the natural environment in the areas that you were shooting for outdoor shots present any challenges to capturing the shots that you were trying to get?
Yeah, like you're exposed to nature and you're exposed to everything, and you have to deal with this, and you have to take advantage of it. At the end of the day, it's tricky and you suffer and you're like struggling to get continuity with the lighting and all this, but honestly, it gave us like a lot of things that we never expected, and it worked out like giving us moments of like incredible poetry, and nature was like working itself for our story. And in the way, like the wind or the strong moments of nature that were like struggling to fight with or to try to keep shooting with, it ended up like being like, I remember like the wind was a big problem for us sometimes, like with the hair, even with the hair of the Emily Blunt and everything. But when I see it on the screen, I see more of the wildness. Than I think it's like it gives like another element of like you're in the middle of the wild and these things happen and it works out. And then the vastness, it's tricky. For example, for the night scenes was like very tricky to work, like how we work in this middle of the plane, how far the light can go. And then we did a mixture of like shooting in natural locations and then bringing some big night scenes to studio and creating like recreating the floor, like the desert floor, and then using blue screens in the back and shooting day for night for the blue screen. So trying to replicate like the moonlight that's impossible to replicate in a real night exterior, and trying to do with this a mixture of techniques of shooting in the studio and shooting plates of day for night for VFX compositions.
So were there any shots of the series that you found particularly challenging to shoot and to capture?
The fire effects, the night effects and the fire effects were like tricky for me. Like, okay, how we do that? Because there's a whole story in the series that is related to the stars. So there are like lots of moments that they are like basically in the middle of a plain desert. Two characters with a little fire effect maybe next to them, or just a candle next to them, and looking at the stars and talking about the stars, and there's like it's a poetic moment, and it's a deep thoughts moment. So like capturing this in was like, okay, like let's make sure that we make the right decisions to capture this and to make it like poetic and fantastic and not super realistic, but at the same time believable and yeah, something that do not distract, do not make it too much of a Disney movie, like make it like very realistic.
So, what I'm also just curious as to what were there any? Because I know you said that you found this new area of Spain that you didn't know about. Was there anything that you felt was in there that was lacking in terms of trying to make it look right to represent the American Midwest?
At the beginning, yes. At the beginning, I was like, I don't know. I was not sure. I was like, but as we start doing it, and I was like, no, this is gonna work. This looks like a Western. And then when I'm seeing the results, I mean, I went to the premiere like last 2 weeks ago in London with my wife, and she was like, "Are you? I mean, this is what you shot like last summer in Spain. Are you sure that you're not lying? I mean, this is not VFX or like no." It's like, and even with the skies, I mean, with the skies, we're like lucky to have like these huge skies that you normally find in America. That I was like, sometimes okay, here in Spain they're not so often, but then we were like lucky enough to have them and capture them, and I don't miss America on the show, honestly.
Well, Arnau, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in just a little bit on our panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Charlie.
I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and I'm speaking with Ramsey Nickell, the cinematographer for the Apple TV Plus limited series 5 Days at Memorial, as part of our TV cinematographers panel for Meet the Experts. One of the most astonishing things about this was seeing the recreation of flooded New Orleans. And I mean, how did you and the crew go about recreating, the flooded areas of New Orleans post-Katrina?
Yeah, that was one of the, huge challenges of doing a show like this. And, it didn't help that we were shooting in Toronto. So when you're trying to recreate, I mean, the thing is, even if we'd been in New Orleans, you still would have had to bring up we would have had to create the water, figure out a way to do that. But as it was, we had to, there's more visual effects shots in the show than were originally designed. When I first started talking to John Ridley, one of the main directors and the writer of the first 5 episodes, it was a very interpersonal story, and it was really about people and less about the external forces. It was more about the pressure cooker that was happening inside the hospital. But then Carlton Hughes, who's the other executive producer and writer, came into it, and he felt it was important to bring in more of the external causes of it as well. So anyway, it ended up being a lot more pure visual effects shots. I mean, there was quite a few, like just from the ground up, the VFX department did an amazing job of just creating everything. New Orleans, flood, everything. But for what we're doing for the personal stuff and for the character stuff, the art department built the facade of the emergency loading ramp there for where the ambulances come into the thing. So anyway, they built that, and they built a section across the street, and then built a tank around it. So it's kind of like one of those backyard pools that you see on America's Funniest Home Videos when the pool breaks and all the water goes flying out. Well, basically, I built one of those. It's just sheet metal all the way around it with these reinforcements around the edges, and then a plastic liner. 1 million gallons of water. And it was, you just can't believe how big the place was that they just built on a big empty lot. And we surrounded that. I had a bunch of gray dolls. I think I had 12 or 13 gray dolls with 20 by 30 blue screens on it that we could move around, because we needed to have access to get into the tank. So every truck, every boat, everything that's in the water in that tank had to be lifted in with a crane over the top, gently placed in the water as to not bump into one of the sides and create one of those horrible tragedies of water just spilling out over the neighborhood. So we had to be able to move the blue screens out of the way. We also had to be able to move them up and around. So it was extremely challenging to to create that look. And we started out at the beginning of the story. We had the storm going, so we have massive special effects coupled with some VFX to create the hurricane as the water is rising. So we have different levels of water. I think we have 18 inches, and we have 2 feet, and then we have 4 feet of water in this big tank. And we would the water also had to be colored so that it looked like flood water, and so that has to be food grade dye because we have kids and people and everyone else in the water, so it can't be toxic. So everything had to be. So it was extremely challenging to make to create that water. And then for any of the other stuff, I mean, they're like, oh, well, we have a lot of scenes on top of a helipad. And you're like, oh, well, we don't really see that much off the top of a helipad. But when you're on the top of a helipad or you're on the ground, you still see New Orleans. In fact, you see more of it. And so we still had to, for that, we had to build a helipad because originally we were thinking, well, we'll just do that on a rooftop somewhere and they won't have to do as much stuff. But when we realized how much was going to have to be done anyway, it made more sense just to go in. So we built a helipad that we could land Seahawk and Black Hawk helicopters on. And so it had to be structurally sound for that. And then we had to, again, surround that with blue screens that could handle the wash of the propellers. So it was very challenging, again, to recreate. And, like I say, being in Toronto, we were just like, God, why are we here? Why are we here? But the reality of it is we had to do so much that it would have been a challenge anywhere. And the crew and support that we had in Toronto was amazing. And so, yeah.
I'm really curious as to how you used your camera, because it's another one of these things where so much of this is taking place, even though it is a building that has several floors on it. As each day goes by, you feel more of the confinement of everything. And I was wondering how you used your camera to communicate that confined nature as the story was progressing.
Another thing I've done several projects with John Ridley, and so he and I have very close working relationship, and he and I think the same way about a lot of things. So when I'm reading his words on the script, I already know like how I would approach it, and then when he and I have our conversations, it's almost always a very similar approach. So that that helps. But I know that John loves close-ups. If he could, he would stay in here for the entire show all the time. And it's a real struggle for me to get him to, John, let's get out a little bit. Let's see the environment. Let's see what's happening around these people that's causing this stress. And
I remember that from American Crime.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, then you can see that I've come a long way in pulling him back. So we knew that we were going to be in these confined spaces because like a lot of the all the sets, everything that we did were built to be as close a representation as possible. And we found a hospital that was built around the same time as Memorial. So it had similar architecture. We found this older hospital up in Toronto, and we were able to use that for a lot of the hallway scenes that had, the rooms on the sides so that we could, do all the different patient rooms, mostly for life care. We had shot most of that in a practical hospital, but for the other stuff, for like the main waiting room, the emergency hallway, the pharmacy, all those things, we built all that on stage. And I say stage, it wasn't a stage, it was a warehouse, because we're always having to build things in warehouses now. And so our production designer and our art director, to build this stage and have the set work inside of support beams that are built all throughout this warehouse, it's really incredible. But I should get back to the original question. So knowing that John likes to use close-ups, knowing that we were going to be in these confined places, knowing that we were going to have the camera, especially as the story progressed, get the camera in there very close. We went, it's kind of the go-to thing these days. We used large format cameras. I use spherical lenses, and generally when I shoot with John, we shoot anamorphic, but again, I just knew we were going to have such close proximity that I really wanted to be able to not have any distortion. And plus, in the hallways and everything else, all the lines, everything, to me, it was really important that it not have that distortion, that weirdness to it, because again, we were really trying to be as authentic and as true as possible, just in respect to the people that were involved, not only at Memorial Hospital, but in all of New Orleans and everybody that was affected by the hurricane. It's still very, I mean, because we did shoot about, for my 5 episodes, we shot about 2 weeks down in New Orleans. And then for Mark's episodes, the last 3 episodes, they were there for probably another couple of weeks shooting stuff in New Orleans. So, but we were using, people that had been through Katrina and, as our background. And so anyway, it was just really important that it be very, very authentic and very believable. And in that, circling back to your question, just being that, having that presence and being really with these people and with the characters, just having the spherical lenses and being able to be in close with the larger format cameras. So, and then as far as movement, is really important that the camera, there are very, very few times when we want to see the camera move. We want to be like, oh, the camera is pressing in for an important moment, or it's doing whatever. But for the most part, the camera is very present and very, very, very restrained.
Well, Ramsey, thank you so much for talking to us, and we look forward to seeing you on our panel in just a little bit.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and I am speaking with Caleb Heymann, the cinematographer for season 4 of Stranger Things on Netflix, as part of our TV cinematographers panel for Meet the Experts. First thing I wanted to ask was, what's amazing about Stranger Things is the combination, not just the photography, but also the way it combines with the visual effects of the show. And I was curious as to what are some of the challenges you encountered with shooting scenes in which a lot of visual effects would be added in post-production?
Yeah, I mean, we were actually lucky to have pretty just gorgeous sets to work with for the most part. And to probably about 95% of the time, like, we were able to be photographing the entire world with minimal set extensions. And so it was our kind of blue screen work really just involved the mind layer, the Vecna's red mind layer space, which was our kind of big blue screen set. And a fair amount of that was actually built out for us to photograph. It was about, like, I think a 70 or an 80 foot diameter circle platform that we had to work with. And obviously so we still had all the interactive lighting, and we had, moving lights in the sky, and a big softbox that was on dimmer switches, basically, so we could kind of have that feeling of the tumultuous, red sky and being in the eye of the storm. Beyond that, the only kind of like big blue screen deal that we had was one of the 360 shot at the lake bed that was like a oneer at the beginning of episode 7. Or maybe it's, the beginning of 7, there's a big fight scene that goes on for like 4 minutes, and it's a oneer. It was actually shot as like 4 shots, cut together. But the Duffer Brothers, they love shooting on location. And even when we're in the upside down woods, that stuff's all on location here in Atlanta, Georgia. At Stone Mountain. So sometimes, we were lighting up like 700 or 800 feet of, space that could then be seen in all directions for like a 5-minute walk and talk, so we could do it without cutting. And I think a lot of people might assume that was on stage, but that was actually on location at night in the freezing cold. The only one where we couldn't actually do it in the upside down was that one that was the oneer, because it was a lake bed that didn't really exist, and it needed to be 360 and all that. But, we had interesting VFX challenges when it came to like incorporating, like the younger version of 11, that, we had to figure out how the stuff with the reflections, was going to work inside the rainbow room, and how we were going to have this 7-year-old version of Millie that she's playing against. And so that ended up, being kind of a lot of planning, a lot of time storyboarding, and then figuring out what shots, needed to actually connect both environments. And we didn't actually have to use any motion control really in the end. And we used a 7-year-old actor as Millie's body double to play the younger 7-year-old version of 11. And then Millie's performance was mapped onto that. But the version of her that was mapped was created through AI software to generate it. So it was a combination of like old school and some really new, generative AI stuff that was happening in the VFX. And actually for Vecna, like our bad guy, he was actually wearing the suit. So that was played by Jamie, and he had to go through 8 hours in the chair, hair and makeup, every time we needed to photograph him in that suit. And it was like, it was horribly uncomfortable for him, obviously. So every time he had a day on, he had to then have a day to recover from it because his days were so long. So we'd be constantly jumping around, between episodes, and, we photograph like the battle royale and the snowball dance for a day. And then we go into the cafeteria and shoot something from episode 1, for a day, and then we're back doing like stunts with Millie and Sadie and Jamie, who plays Vecna, like a lot of wire work for that finale. But a surprising amount of it is actually sets that were built by Chris Trujillo and Sean Brennan in our incredible art department.
So what's interesting is that you with this season of Stranger Things, you had all these different locations that things were taking place in, and I want to know what sort of things did you use in establishing the look for different settings, like the lab, Russia, Indiana, California, and the Upside Down as well.
Yeah, that was a fun aspect to this season because I was coming in, I'd done second unit work on season 3, but coming into season 4 was an incredible time, to have this opportunity to do main unit, because the palette just expanded so much, and all these different locations. And, the Duffer Brothers really wanted to lean into, different looks and feels for these new locations. So, Hawkins is kind of our home base as we know it, but it was going to be like a slightly more melancholic version of it. I mean, season 3 was kind of, bright and colorful and poppy, and we're in the mall. And this one, they wanted it a little bit, kind of a little bit starker, and kind of, a little bit darker, a little bit moodier. Which goes along with what's happening emotionally with the characters as they grow older, and they go into this weird time of starting high school, all the uncertainties and insecurities of that, all the traumas, and the family issues that they're having to deal with. So it was getting more adult and more real, and they wanted the look to reflect that even in Hawkins. And then when we go out to California, or the kind of, West Coast storyline, the suburban one, it was kind of referencing that kind of, E.T., kind of this suburban, idyllic, Southern California, but mountainous vibe. But they wanted to feel, sunnier, and to have a little bit more hard sun, and kind of like these pops of the pastel colors and that. Whereas obviously Alaska was the opposite of it. Alaska, which then that storyline then becomes Russia and Kamchatka. So that was going to be cooler. And then as we get into the Russia stuff, we were going really kind of mellow, monochromatic, and more underexposed for that stuff. never feeling, you know, the direct sun, just sort of like this permanent blue hour. And then as we get into the prison, it was a chance to, the Russian prison was a chance to play with like these funky different mixed color temperatures. So we could have like, you know, these gnarly green fluorescence and the you know, the warm sodium vapors mixing with the kind of ambient blue hour, you know, kind of like low lit daylight, was a really nice palette to, you know, to have a chance to combine those different color temperatures. And then this stuff, you know, the upside down has already been established. So, you know, we were doing some different stuff in it, but it's that sort of monochromatic blue. And then the mine layer, you know, we went very warm amber reds with that. So it was cool to have that kind of different visual signature for each location. Yeah.
Well, Caleb, thank you so much for talking with us, and we look forward to seeing you on our panel in just a little bit.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and I'm and as part of our TV cinematographers panel for Meet the Experts, I'm speaking with Natalie Kingston from Apple TV Plus's Blackbird, Arnau Valls Colomer for Amazon Prime's The English, Ramsey Nickell for Apple TV Plus's 5 Days of Memorial, and Caleb Heymann for Netflix's Stranger Things. First question I want to throw to you, Natalie. What were what was one of, or what were some of the influential scenes that when you saw them that made you think to yourself, yeah, I want to do that. I want to photograph this stuff for film and television.
Nothing, actually. Honestly, it wasn't like watching a movie that that really inspired me, because growing up, we didn't really watch that many movies. My parents really weren't into watching films. So but I was a very creative child. And they exposed me a lot to like live theater. We saw a lot of musicals. So I was always like creating like little musicals and plays with my friends and my sister and cousins, little like circuses, little ice skating shows that I would do on my roller skates, because I grew up in South Louisiana, so it didn't snow. And always kind of like, you know, doing photo shoots with my Barbies. So always just doing these little productions. And I guess I was around 10 years old when my parents bought a home video camera, you know, VHS camcorder style. And I was like, you know, light bulb went off. I'm like, I could film these little plays. So I would adapt these, you know, children's stage plays I would find at the children's section in the library and into like screenplays and make them into little movies. And like, I remember one that sticks out, it's called Night in the Spooky Mansion. And, you know, I remember like filming at my grandmother's house for the interiors, but then using this house across the street from her as the exteriors, because it was this like creepy house or whatever. And so just sort of like that magic that you could make with a camera really, really stuck with me. So I give the VHS camcorder credit for that. And so, of course, I didn't know what a cinematographer was at the time, you know, but just the idea of just telling stories with a camera is the thing that stuck with me. So it really wasn't until I started working in the industry that it dawned on me, like, okay, a cinematographer is the one that's really crafting and creating a visual language and has control over lighting and composition and the way things look. So, yeah.
What about you, Caleb?
Oh, yeah, I think for me it was a mix. My mom is a documentary filmmaker, but we kind of stumbled into it together. She was a professor at Portland State University. So growing up in Portland, you're kind of far from the film industry. And this was the 90s, it was pre-digital revolution when I was in high school and stuff. I mean, there were movies that I loved, and there were movies like It that had always stuck with me. I mean, I'm talking about like the TV version, you know, that had haunted me since I was a kid, and always had a thing for like horror. But then we kind of started, doing documentaries together toward the end of high school, having no idea what we were doing on really, really basic equipment. But it got me to start picking up a camera, and just going through the whole process of having to, shoot, go on location, find the good natural light, come back. We would edit it together on the tape to tape, and kind of like, think about the whole process holistically, as well as kind of like bake in those editing decisions, as you went, because it was like linear. We couldn't touch the Final Cut Pro machine because we couldn't afford that one. So that was an interesting kind of like training ground. But then in college, shortly after that, it was like kind of seeing movies like Memento and Mulholland Drive and even Lost in Translation. And I was just like, and a few years ago before that, like Fight Club. And I was just like this really great time for cinema. And so I had the opportunity in college to start taking a couple classes in film before I actually went to film school. And just, I lost myself in them for the first time, lost track of time, and was just like, this is what I have to figure out a way to do. But yeah, I got pretty obsessed with Mulholland Drive when that came out. I watched it like 3 times in one evening, trying to figure out.
Still had no idea what was going on.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. There was one point where I convinced myself I had figured it out. I can't even remember what it was though. But yeah, all of this.
And what about you, Arnau?
I think I got into this film industry through the photography. Like photography was like when I was like 16, I had like this lesson in the school where it was like photography, and the photography teacher was like starting in the film school that was just starting in Barcelona at that time. And he told me like, oh, there's this thing that is starting and then he showed me one day and I was like, oh, fascinated about like, wow, you can do this, like this little studio and lights and cameras and everything. And I got into the film school in Barcelona, and then I moved to Poland and I went to the Polish film school, and then there I discovered like the wall for me, and getting to know all these Polish film traditions and all this Eastern European tradition of films that I was kind of aware but never got really into it. That was the time for me to discover everything, and then back to the reality of the industry and going from there.
And what about you, Ramsey?
Well, my father was a film critic when I was young, and so kind of learned an appreciation for sitting in a dark theater and watching movies with him. And but I really didn't have any concept of what happened before I got into the theater and sat down. I mean, I knew there was an industry, but I just really, it was not anything I ever even thought about. And I had a bunch of different jobs throughout my youth, and I ended up in Los Angeles. And I was sleeping on a buddy's couch and starting to run out of money. It's a very long story, but the shortened version is, he was like, hey, you want to run some tapes for me? And he was editing a Pink Floyd concert. And I went and picked up some tapes from Post House there and took them up to the company, which was the name of the music video company that was doing it. And I saw this director was on a conference call in the office, and he was walking around the conference table and the phone in the middle. And he was like talking about how John was going to come shooting up out of the middle of the stage, and then Richie was going to run around the thing. And I was like watching, I was just like in awe of his energy and his enthusiasm. He was talking about Lay Your Hands on Me video by Bon Jovi that they were getting ready to do. And I was like, all right, whatever he's doing, I want to be a part of that. And so I became a PA, and I just kept kind of lucking into one thing after another. And then I got in, I had a mentor, a great guy that hired me as an electrician when he was a best boy, and he was besting for 2 of the biggest gaffers at the time in music videos. And then they started shooting, and he moved up and started gaffing and got all of their clients, which was, some of the best people in the business. And then he started shooting, and every time he's like, come on, you're my best boy now. I was like, I don't know. And he's like, come on. And then he was like, okay, you got to gaff for me. I'm like, all right. So I gaffed for him. And then I started gaffing for Bill Pope and Larry Fong and Dan Mendel and, all these guys who were like, top of the game of music videos and are now, some of the biggest guys in the business. And I just really and truly was in the right place at the right time a million different times. And I can't believe how lucky I am that all those things happen for me to get to do something that if I thought about doing this as a kid and been working on it my whole life, it couldn't have turned out any better than it did. So just super, super fortunate.
I want to have a little bit of fun here with a bit of a hypothetical. So you're all here because you're representing different TV projects, but I'm curious as to, is there any TV show that you've watched recently? I don't know, maybe you've had time in the past 2 years to watch some TV, and you've said to yourself, oh man, I would love to shoot for this show. And I know Caleb, you can't say Stranger Things because you're already on that.
I can't say Marvel because I'm getting to live out that dream right now. Just starting prep on a project here for Marvel, which I'm really excited about. And yeah, I mean, of course, like I really like to change it up and to do something very different if possible. So I would say I'm trying to think of an actual series, but doing like something that was like really character driven and had like really leaned into one person's subjectivity and the weird, kind of just sci-fi future that we're heading into, where who knows where between climate change and changing technology and AI and all these things, where it's all going to converge, like a near, sci-fi futuristic thing, something that was like character driven would really appeal to me, where we got to do a bit of world building, but it was all in the interest of like serving a character. I mean, I would love to do something for like Alex Garland, and like a mini series where like Devs was great, something like that would be like really appealing to me, I would say.
I think I would love to have shot The Night Of, for example, or this kind of mini series, and then I love political series as well. So I think the series I've watched most is The West Wing. So I'm very much into this. But yeah, the kind of Night Of miniseries is like the kind of things that I was like, oh wow, that I would love to have shot that.
And Ramsey?
Well, having just spent so much time working on such depressing shows, I'd really like to do something fun and lighthearted. I mean, I watched, I really enjoyed watching The Great. I just think it's fun, it's pretty, just like there's no real stakes. You're just not feeling like, you can just kind of go in there and have fun and not feel like you owe, I don't want to say but just like the responsibility of doing 5 days was weighed on me a lot. And so to do something where you just go in and you could actually laugh after a take, I mean, it's just, I would love to do something light.
and as we were talking about American Crime, I remember how that felt watching it, so I understand what you're saying completely.
Yeah, working with John Ridley, it's always I love it, but man, oh man, there's no time for laughing.
And what about you, Natalie?
There was this limited series called I Know This Much Is True on HBO. That's, I think, one of the best series I've ever seen. It's just so emotionally and character driven, which is just right up my alley. It was shot on film. Just the visual language was just so powerful, and I just really connected to that. It was very depressing, but that's also right up my alley. And I guess, yeah, so to shoot something like that, and it, Mark Ruffalo played a set of twins, so just the challenge of doing that with the camera. And on the other end of the spectrum, like something like super stylized, like Euphoria, could be a lot of fun. And just to get to play and just coming up with like wild visual languages is appealing to me.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you all the best through this upcoming season, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Hope to see all of you guys again.